when you were now the managing director, what was that like for you? What was the day-to-day roles? What are the kind of things that you would have to encounter and the type of challenges that you would face?
Well, it was a really difficult time for Ireland because I got the job pretty much a month after Ireland was purchased and stopped being indie. So Ireland was purchased by Polygram, part of the Philips Group, a publicly quoted company, huge company, already the #1 music company in the world. And suddenly little old Ireland gets integrated into it. And I got the job as the managing director. But unfortunately, as with all of these takeovers, there were kind of rules and there were sort of things that were expected of me that were really quite difficult. When I took over, I remember really very clearly that we had about 120 staff working in the UK, and we had 211 acts signed to the roster on a worldwide basis for a tiny little indie. And my first job, really for the first year, was cutting, and it was terribly difficult because many of the people that I had to cut were people that I had grown up with. I'd worked with them in the company, and then all of a sudden I was being the bad guy. But the thing that really happened was that it caused us to get completely new focus. And in the same way that, for argument's sake, David Cameron and the Conservative Party now takes all the bad news in the first year or the first term of their government, they do that because it's somebody else's fault. They can blame Labour for everything. They won't be able to do that in 3 years' time. I did that in the first year and a half of running Ireland. I took all the pain in a very early time, and I was well advised on this. I had really good people around me. And then I set about rebuilding with my fantastic team of A&R guys. We were all really enthusiastic, and we'd been given this fantastic toy shop to play in. And we just went out there and started making signings, and we signed in quick succession tiny deals with people like the Stereo MCs, who went on to sell millions of albums, with Nine Inch Nails, who have become a worldwide phenomena, PJ Harvey, Tricky, Cranberries sold 23 million albums, to PM Dawn, to Talvin Singh, to, just went on and on and on. And we did something really unusual. We created a genre that was normally owned by indies, proper indies, and even though we were a major now, we weren't really in the pop world. We were very much in the commercial alternative. That's what I termed it as. So everything was alternative, but if we did our job right, we would persuade enough of the audience to come to the act, and the act we would persuade to move towards the audience. And when that happens, we ended up with real commercial successes. But people tend to forget how hard we worked doing that. It wasn't, it was very rare, the rare first album like Tricky's Maxine K, where it just kicked off out of the box. Most, like the Stereo MCs, by the time we got to the album Connected, which sold so many records and won 4 Brit Awards, by the time we got to that, we'd released 3 albums. We'd worked really hard at it, but we could do that because our cost base was so low, because we were doing deals that were not competing with everybody else. We were doing small deals that were logical and they were manageable, and that allowed, on the first Stereo MCs album, I think we sold 15,000 units worldwide. But our costs went so high that we couldn't get to the second album, which sold 60,000 units worldwide, and that meant that we could get to the third album, Connected, which sold 2.5–3 million units worldwide.
So that shows then that there was almost, you were operating almost like on an indie model over a major label.
We were very much working on an indie model. The other thing is I was blessed really, Amaru, because I had the protection too of Chris Blackwell, that even though we were part of Polygram, which was the #1 music company in the world, Chris retained certain rights over it, and so therefore I was the only managing director within this big world that reported to him rather than to the UK structure. So I didn't report into, for the first 5 years of doing the job, I didn't report into the public company per se. I did, but via Chris, and Chris provided us with a lot of protection, as it were. So we were allowed to get on with doing what we wanted, whereas some of our compadres in the other labels, and let's face it, it was, if you think about what Polygram was at the time, it was Motown, Philips, Def Jam, Mercury, Polydor, Deutsche Grammophon, Decca Classics, Geffen, A&M. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And Ireland just had this sort of privileged world where we continued to report to Chris, and we acted as an indie within the major label system. And so we even took a very indie attitude to our signings. We were not competing directly with major labels. I do remember when we were signing Polly Harvey, PJ Harvey, who's, I'm very proud of her as a signing. I think she's an amazing artist. Our competition was only Ivo Watts Russell and 4AD Records, which was a very, very good quality indie. We were not competing against Sony or anybody else, and even that was hard, because for someone like Polly, signing to a major, which is what we technically were, could have been seen to be a real sort of giving up of her rights. I think I could say that I had, when I look back on it with rose-tinted glasses, I can say that I had 7 glorious years. Yeah. I think I had 7 good years, where I felt proud of my team and what we achieved, and I felt that we did the right thing, and I felt that we helped music push the boundaries forward. I was very pleased with what our legacy was. But then Polygram was purchased in a shock move, where it was suddenly part of Universal. And I survived the cut, and I was given the opportunity of either going, which I could have done, or staying. But the conditions for staying was that I had to merge MCA, Universal, Island, Motown into the supergroup that it currently is now. So the Universal Island group that currently exists and is so good and so potent was something that I was the architect of. So I put that together effectively. It was heartbreaking, because in doing so I had to let go of people that I had worked with for 7 years. I'd nurtured them, I'd trained them, some of them I'd brought in myself, and I'd really nurtured them. But suddenly I had to merge these massive companies together into something lean and mean, and it meant that I had to make really difficult decisions. And in some respects it broke my heart, and I really mean that. It broke my spirit there, that it wasn't the same company, and I felt that somehow I lost my way. And if I'm realistic about it, I then had 3 pretty painful years, because I felt that I was managing upwards. I was managing my relationships within Universal more than I was managing my staff and my artists, and it was very tough.
But with that, you have shareholders, you have financial targets to make. Did it make you lose almost the passion of music because it became so financially driven?
Things became pretty financially driven, as you'd expect. When there's a sort of mistake that people make, that when you add companies together, that 1 + 1 + 1 = 5. But sometimes 1 + 1 + 1 = 2, and it's a bizarre thing, but that's the case, because you have to disrupt things so much and so fundamentally that you can lose 2 years worth of A&R development, for argument's sake, which is your future money, your future lifeblood, just simply because you're worrying about the team and putting the team together, and you're worried about structure, and you're worried about all this rubbish that has nothing to do with selling music. So it kind of knocked the wind out of my sails from a creative point of view, but especially because we've been doing so well up till that point. I used the Island Records building refurbishment budget, because there was no budget for building a website. So I kind of scraped money out of the Island refurbishment budget, didn't spend money on repainting the outside of the building, and spent it on building a website in 1995 or 4 or something like that. And it was categorically the first major website for a music company in the UK, maybe even one of the first in the world, frankly.